Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be going over a Frost build that is a little bit different than the traditional teleport in Frost Nova spam ice shards build that you're probably used to. It does still utilize ice shards, but it also utilizes frozen orb. It is a dual core build that is focused highly on range play, though you can teleport in Frost Nova if you want to, which I will do several times during the gameplay footage. But primarily it's designed to be played at range. You open up with 2 Frost Orbs to start. Sometimes you just cast one and auto cast the second one thanks to our enchantment slot. Those 2 Frost Orbs are going to ensure everything is frozen due to the fact that we're taking additional chill application. It's also going to make sure that everything on the screen is vulnerable. Same effect as if you had teleported in and hit your Frost Nova, except for you can do it safely from range, which is really nice. And then you spam your ice shards or your Frost Orb, depending on whichever one you want to use at any given time, and you blow everything up. If it's a dense heavy pack of mobs, you spam your Frost Orb. If it's a single or a couple small groups of enemies or an elite, you do your ice shards. And you just kind of adapt to the situation as need be. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at how the build is set up, and then we'll look at, we'll have gameplay playing in the bottom right corner throughout the entire thing. But let's take a look. Alright, so let's first look at stat priorities. As you can see on the graphic here, I have labeled the must-have stats as red squares, the high priority stats as blue. Basically, you have to have the red on each item slot to make the build really function well, and then the blues you can just kind of pick and choose as you see fit. Do keep in mind as you're building out your stats, it's always beneficial to balance your different damage buckets. If you're not sure what damage buckets are, check it out. I'll probably be making a video on it soon. But you want to have everything in balance, more or less, is the TLDR of it. Anything that is damage 2 is its own bucket, vulnerable is its own bucket, crit damage is its own bucket, and primary stats is its own bucket, and of course weapon damage. And they're all multiplied together. But anyway, without getting into weeds too much, you can just kind of use this graphic here to guide what you're grabbing as far as stats. Things that are of particular note that you need to keep an eye out for are anything that is lucky hit based. So lucky hit while you have barrier, or just raw lucky hit. This is a heavy lucky hit build. It's how you fuel your mana, your healing, and your procs. So you definitely want to focus on that. You also want to grab as much crit chance as you can, and as much cooldown reduction and vulnerability as you can. Beyond that, things that you're looking for also are lucky hit chance to restore primary resource that will basically make sure that you don't run out of mana, even though you're just spamming nothing but core abilities and cooldowns. One of the aspects we take also helps with that as well, but we'll get into that in a second. Any mana cost reduction you can grab is also helpful. And yeah, so go ahead and use this graphic that's on the screen to guide how you gear your character. I'll put it as an image in the video description as well, so you can download it in case you want to play this build. And hopefully that's helpful. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at the different aspects that we're going to be using and why we're using. Okay. So I've broken this up into 2 sections: early gearing when you're first getting it online, and then when you're speed farming as you're leveling up to 100. Haven't made it up to 100 yet, I'm at level 90, so haven't been able to test pushing, quote unquote. I have cleared a Nightmare 60 with this, but it was a little bit squishy. I think I'd probably change around some aspects if I were trying to clear 70s, 60s and 70s, but this is mostly a build that's set for quick clearing and just having fun. But it is safe, so that's kind of one of the benefits of it. The first thing we're going to look at is the helm slot. You're going to want to be grabbing the lucky hit chance while you have barrier active. You're always going to have barrier active, thanks to some of the gearing choices we're going to make, as well as the Paragon choices we're going to make, which we'll go into in just a moment. Aspect of disobedience, of course, with any build is absolutely essential for maintaining your armor values and your damage mitigation. Aspect of the inner column on the gloves is what I would use. While you're standing still, you can get up to a 30 times multiplier on your damage. If you don't like standing still, you could go with one of the other damage multipliers, such as extra damage to vulnerable enemies while you have barrier up. I have found that it does not take very long to stack this up. It's really just a few seconds of standing still, and your teleport doesn't count as you moving, so you can actually reposition with teleport if you want and keep your bonus up. For pants, you're going to use Aspect of Protector early on, and then once you find the Ice Heart Bryce, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, you're going to want to switch over to that. It'll just make it so anytime anything frozen dies, it explodes in a Frost Nova, which will reapply vulnerable and just keep things frozen. Very helpful. A little bit of extra damage as well, so very good. For the boots, you're going to start off with the Ghostwasher aspect. This is going to give you more movement speed as you're teleporting around. You're going to switch over to Penitent Greaves once you find those. If you find you have enough damage without the Greaves, just stick with the Ghostwalker and you'll move a lot faster through dungeons and be able to speed farm quicker. Another benefit of this is whenever you gain Unstoppable, you're also going to get phasing, so you can move through enemies. You're unstoppable anytime you teleport with your teleport. Yeah, that one got away from me. But yeah, you'll be able to walk through enemies after you teleport and you'll move a lot quicker, so that's very helpful for keeping the pace of things going. On your weapon, you're going to want Aspect of Piercing Cold. This is going to give you piercing for your ice shards, and it's also going to reduce the damage ice shards do just a little bit, but it's worth it. I tested with and without, and the piercing is just too good to pass up. Aspect of Control goes on your amulet because you get the 50% bonus effects. Aspect of Control gives you damage multipliers for frozen, stunned, and immobilized. We're really just freezing with this build. If you wanted to run Raiment with this build, you certainly could, and that would give you an additional multiplier. I personally built this specifically for having an ice build that you can use without having to have Raiment. So many of the guys said you have to have this, and you're just at the RNG mercy of the gods. So I built this build specifically not to have to use it. It certainly functions with it, but it certainly functions just as well without it too. In fact, I like a little bit more without it because you get more survivability, and this build is very tanky. For running speed stuff, you should never die, really, unless you're just really not paying attention. This is a very tanky build. Obviously, if you're pushing, everything is squishy on Sorcerer, but c'est la vie. For your rings, you're going to want to utilize your Aspect of Frozen Memories. This makes it so your Avalanche key passive has a chance to proc twice. Well, it does proc twice whenever it procs. If you're not familiar with what that key passive does, essentially what it does is it increases the damage of your core skills, which is the only thing we're doing damage with, by 40% for your next cast, and it also makes it free. By having this aspect, it makes it so you get two 40% increased damage casts of your core skills, and they're both free. And you can proc additional avalanche stacks off of an avalanche cast, which means sometimes you get chains of 3, 4, 5, or even 6 core abilities in a row, all at 40 times damage and costing no mana, which is fantastic. With this in mind, you could also use Edgemaster instead of the Standing Still aspect. I did find the Standing Still one is just more consistent though, because you do still drop below the mana thresholds that you'd want to stay at to really make use of Edgemaster on a reliable basis, so whatever your mileage may vary, do as you wish. For your offhand, you're going to want to have the Conceited aspect either way. It's going to give you a 20 to 25% multiplicative damage multiplier whenever you have Barrier active. This is extraordinarily strong, and as I said earlier, we have Barrier active like the large majority of the time. Basically, every time you use the cooldown, you get Barrier, and every time you kill a trash mob, you get a Barrier. So you pretty much have perpetual Barrier if you're actually like rotating through stuff and paying attention. There are certainly times in this video where my Barrier drops, but that's mostly just because I wasn't really paying very close attention. But you can definitely keep near 100% uptime on your Barrier. As you're running through dungeons, if you're doing speed farming, 3 to 4 levels above you, that's what you should be doing. You can do pretty much anything. If you're doing about 10 levels above you, you can do pretty much anything. If you're going much above 10 levels above your level, you're going to want to watch out for corpse bows because they're terrible, and wraiths because they're terrible. Still do them, but I would just skip those dungeons if you're going more than 10 levels above your current level. Alright, now let's go ahead and pause, go into a live game, and we're going to take a look at the talent tree and the Paragon Board. Alrighty, let's first look at the talent tree, and then we'll look at the Paragon Board. So top section, your basic abilities don't really matter. We're not going to be taking the Firebolt enchantment like the majority of builds do. I did test it with this, it was quite strong, but then it just went into a more traditional Ice Shards build, and I really wanted to have a build that was utilizing Frozen Orb. I did, by the way, test out the aspect that makes Frozen Orb detonate twice. I just found the current setup to be a little bit stronger, and I tested it out a lot. Anyway, you're going to want to take either one of those, it doesn't really matter, you need 2 ranks of those as you move into the next one. We're going to max out both Frozen Orb and Ice Shards. The evolutions we take on the end are a little bit flexible depending on where you're at in your gearing process. Early on, before you get the mana sustain that you really need, you can take Destructive Orb for getting mana back. This will be really good sustain for you. But once you can manage your mana without this, the vulnerability from Frozen Orb is a massive boost. It basically makes Frozen Orb a long-range Frost Nova. That makes everything vulnerable, so it's just, you can't beat it. Ice Shards, you're going to want to take the one that makes them vulnerable. The Ricochet one is fun, especially if you're really speed farming. But the vulnerable uptime is just too good to pass up. I personally very much prefer Destructive Ice Shards. That said, I did run Greater Ice Shards for 2 or 3 days while I was testing stuff out, and it worked perfectly fine as well. On to the next section, we're actually skipping Flame Shield, even though it is amazing. But we are taking Teleport, and then we're taking the damage reduction from Teleport. We're taking Ice Armor, and then we're taking the evolution that makes it so whenever we hit a vulnerable enemy, it adds onto our barrier. This is actually really good because things are vulnerable pretty much 100% of the time, so we're always adding to our barrier when we hit them if we have Ice Armor up. There's another way that you can kind of keep your barrier rolling. Frost Nova, we're taking the evolution that makes them vulnerable when it detonates. And again, early on, if you need the mana, you can take the Frost Nova generates mana. It's very handy. Once you have Ice Heart Brace, it just basically means that you're hitting your Frost Orbs on everything from range, freezing them. And as soon as you blow them up, it'll reapply freeze to everything else in the area and either give you a shot of mana back or give you vulnerable on everything. Either way, it's very valuable. We're going to take 1 rank of Elemental Attunement just so we have a lucky hit chance to reset our defensive cooldown. There's a 10-second cooldown on this, but this does proc quite often because you're going to have near 100% lucky hit chance with this build. So that basically means whenever you crit, which is going to be quite frequently, there's a 5% chance for your defensive cooldowns to be reset. Keep in mind when you're casting your Frost Orb, it's hitting 6 or 7 times before it detonates, so every one of those hits can crit, and every one of those hits that can crit can also proc Elemental Attunement. Same thing is true with Ice Shards, it's hitting a lot of times. That's why this build is so strong with Lucky Hit, because you hit so many times, your Lucky Hit is pretty much every cast. Moving down into Precision Magic, we're going to increase our Lucky Hit chance by 15% just to move it closer to that 100% threshold. And then under Ice Blades, this is taken so that we can reduce our cooldowns of everything consistently. Ice Blades themselves also apply Vulnerable, which is very handy. But every time they hit a vulnerable target, they also reduce their own cooldown as well as the cooldown of other things. So basically it just gives you much faster cooldowns, much more mana generation through use of your cooldowns, because every time we use a cooldown, we're regenerating mana, or we're generating barrier, and then every time we hit with barrier, we have a chance to regenerate mana. So yeah, it all just kind of synergizes together. Align the Elements is going to give us damage reduction that stacks over time, as long as we don't take damage. Once we take damage, that damage reduction goes away, but it can help with that burst damage from the elite that charges you off screen. More importantly though, it opens up Mana Shield, which is going to give you damage reduction for every 100 mana you spend. You're going to be spending tons of mana all the time, but you're also going to be replenishing it, but that basically means you have that 15% damage reduction up pretty much constantly. Protection is going to give you 30% of your max life as a barrier whenever you use a cooldown. This is why max life was valued so heavily on the previous graphic that showed you your stat priorities. This basically just means that we're increasing our life by 30% every time we use a cooldown. So it's pretty good. Moving down into the passes, our barriers are going to have 15% additional uptime with Icy Veil. We're going to take 1 rank of Snap Freeze, which is going to give us a lucky hit chance to instantly freeze enemies. This works off of our Ice Shards as well as our Frost Orb. Now, our Frost Orb will freeze automatically every 2 casts, but this also makes it just so Ice Shards that pierce through everything and ricochet all over the place have a chance to freeze as well. Very handy. Moving down into our ultimate skill section, we're not taking any ultimates, but we are taking the ultimate skill passives, which are very strong. This is how we can afford to skip out on the enchantment of Firebolt and give up the damage from that, is because we're maxing these out. So Permafrost is going to give us 15% multiplicative damage to elites. Hoarfrost is going to give us 9% to chilled enemies multiplicative and 18% to frozen. Enemies will be frozen a large majority of the time, and we usually kill them before they become unfrozen. If you have to do 2 cycles, it loses a little bit of value, but most of the time you don't have to do that. And then Frigid Breeze is going to give us extra cold damage, or give our cold damage a chance to regenerate mana whenever we hit a vulnerable enemy. Everything will always be vulnerable, so essentially this reads as you have a 20% chance to generate 15 mana whenever you hit an enemy. Remember that every ability we cast hits 5 to 7 times, so that means we have a constant stream of mana kind of flowing back in. So, very good. And another reason why it's good to take the vulnerables all over the place, because you still get the mana generation down here, right? Icy Touch is going to give you an 8% multiplicative damage to vulnerable enemies, so it just helps ramp up our damage a little bit more. And then Avalanche, which is our key passive, makes it so you have a 10% chance for your next Ice Shards, Frozen Orb, or Blizzard to consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage. Chances doubled against vulnerable enemies, which once again, everything is vulnerable, so essentially you have a 20% chance for your spells to be free and hit 40 times harder. So yeah, that's good. Alright, with the skill tree out of the way, let's go ahead and look at our Paragon Boards. I would like to note that at the very beginning, instead of taking Exploit here, I would probably take Control to start. Where is it at? There we go. Just because it's a huge damage multiplier at the beginning, but eventually this is kind of how you want your board set up. So we're going to path along the right side to get the non-physical damage yellow node, and then move up into the glyph slot. I'm going to put Exploit in here eventually. This is give us more damage against vulnerable enemies, and once again, we're making things vulnerable all the time, so this is great. Kind of filling out to grab a few dexterity nodes here to make sure we activate that secondary effect, and then we're going to move up through the non-physical damage once again. Non-physical damage scales us like crazy in this build, so let's keep moving up that way, and then up into the next board, which is the Icefall board as your second board. Now you're going to grab the glyph slot first, and then grab the legendary node after that. For the glyph slot, we're going to use Unleash. This is going to give us some early mana sustain, since we are going to struggle with that at the very beginning. It's also going to give us a nice little damage multiplier to start, and it's going to make all of those blue nodes more valuable. As you can see here, I think I have my Unleash at like level 16 or 17? Yeah, so it's not even maxed out yet. It's already giving me 28.4% more damage against chilled enemies, and more importantly, 10.9% damage reduction against chilled enemies, and just a little bit of extra dexterity and willpower from the blue nodes that we grabbed to activate it. You could drop off the dexterity and willpower blue nodes probably and still be fine, or some of them anyway, but the biggest thing is the damage reduction from chilled. That's going to be a really big survivability boost for you very early on. Alright. Then we're going to path up this way. We're going to grab Polar Rime, which is going to give us a big boost to damage against chilled enemies, which everything's going to be chilled, except for, bosses until you stagger them. But it's a big damage boost. Getting some more damage to chilled enemies with the blue nodes around it, and some non-physical damage. And then we're going to move up, and this is very important early on to grab. The damage reduction from chilled enemies once again. Lots of survivability very early on. And then a big boost to that right here. Moving down, we're going to grab Icefall. This is going to give you 15% of your max life as barrier whenever you kill enemies for 5 seconds. Another way that we can ensure that we have 100% barrier uptime. Very, very helpful. We're going to path over and grab Cryomancy as well. This is going to give us chill application. This is how we get our Frozen Orb to chill after 2 casts instead of 3. It's very, very handy. So make sure you grab that before you move on to your third board. Now here's a very important part that you might not get just looking at the board. You actually do not want to go to this board third. You want to stop even though you're already up here, and you want to actually path over to this board next. Your Element or Enchantment Master should be your third board. The reason for this is the scaling of the yellow nodes. It's a lot easier to get this active, and it's an important passive bonus early on. And then this one is so important, but yeah. I think that this board is more valuable because you're going to get this big non-damage physical boost, damage to elites boost, and then a lot more non-physical damage. That's just a ton of damage. This is good too. It's damage reduction. It's good. This is vulnerable damage. That's good as well. But I just feel like the non-physical damage and the elite damage they're just massive numbers. You can't really pass off getting those activated early. So going to this as your third board is really important. So We're going to path over and up to grab this Ruinous node. Once again, we just talked about that. That's on physical damage and damage to elites. We get 2 elite damage nodes right here, which is great. Bosses are also counted as elites, by the way. And then some more non-physical damage. After we grab that, we're going to go down, activate the glyph for destruction. Destruction is going to give us scaling for our crit damage, which is really, really good. And more importantly, it's also going to make it so that anytime we crit, which is very frequently, we're going to multiplicatively increase all damage taken from the enemies by us, which is just fantastic. After that, we're going to path on over to the Elementalist node, and we're going to grab non-physical damage and maximum life. This is nice, just giving us a little boost to toughness as well as damage at the same time. And then we're going to move up into our 4th board up here, moving off of the Chill application up into the Frigid Fate board. Frigid Fate board is going to give you a boost to your lucky hit chance. This is going to make sure that you get closer to that 100% uptime on that lucky hit. You're also going to grab Oppressive, which is going to give you more vulnerable damage and damage reduction. As you can see, I'm just short of getting enough dexterity here. I need to get all stat on one of my items. I don't have that at the moment. I didn't realize it until I'd already had most of my gear set up, so I gotta go back and kind of fix that. But shouldn't be a big deal. It should be pretty easy to get 20 dexterity. We're also going to grab Guarded, which is going to give us more damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, and we're going to get some more damage reduction from vulnerable enemies with the blue nodes. Once again, everything is always vulnerable, so this is just essentially a big chunk of extra damage reduction. Frigid Fate is going to give us lucky hit chance, and then moving up here, we're going to grab a little bit more lucky hit chance with advantage, and then the 2 magic nodes. Last, once you're into your 90s, you're going to move over into this final board here, and you're just going to grab these elite damage bonuses and movement speed from killing elites. Most likely you're not going to get that secondary bonus on this last one, but that's okay. You're still getting a heck of a lot of bonus damage to elites just with these nodes right here. And that should be more or less your Paragon board. All things said and done with my current gear setup with the stat priorities I put on that video, my lucky hit chance is pretty close to 100% when I have barrier up. So lucky hit right now is at 54.4%. My lucky hit with barrier is 24.4%. You add those together and you get 79% roughly. So 79%, and then you also have, don't forget the Frigid Fate bonus, which is an additional 15%. So that's 89, 94%. So we have 94% lucky hit chance. I actually am missing lucky hit on one of my item slots. Can't remember which one, but I'm missing it on one of my item slots. I was at 100% for a while, so you can definitely get there. But yeah, that's kind of how this build plays out. Hopefully you guys did enjoy it. If you have questions, feel free to ask them down below. And use whatever potions you want for this, really, but I think the crit ones are probably the most valuable ones. So, like, favorite, share, subscribe, tune in for more guides in the future. I'm going to probably work on either a lightning one next that's not Arc Lash, because, you know, Arc Lash is done to death, or I'll work on a meteor fire sorc that I already have theory crafted. Can't decide yet, but I'm going to do one of those two. So, anyway, come back, check us out again, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this video.